Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. And today we get to talk with Emma Murray. What's up, Emma? How are you?
I'm good.
You're
Thanks for having
good.
me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thrilled to be right here, right now, talking about this freaking collection. Because as I was nerding out about before we got on, oh, do I love The Drowning Machine and Other Obsessions. So freaking good. But
Thank you.
we'll get that out of the way here in the next hour or so. So, how's life? Are you good?
Yeah, I mean, things are mostly good. Still it's recovering from the holidays and all
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It's early 2025. The weather's just tremendously helpful right now in Connecticut. So, all the things. Um, yeah, we've had a little bit more snow here in Virginia than we normally have. I don't know if it's been the same for you guys or not, but
I mean, I just moved up here in the summer, so definitely more snow than in Texas.
wait. So, did you move from Texas this past summer?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so yeah, it's my first winter here, but it's been not too bad.
Yeah. Definitely colder than Texas.
I like that though. That's one of
Yeah,
the reasons we moved. It was just too hot
good.
there. Like I'll take the milder summers with the really cold winters. Like
Yeah, because it's otherwise it's like really hot summers and
yeah.
mild winters down there.
Oh yeah, like so hot in the summer now you can barely go outside. It's like I don't think it's going to be livable in like a couple decades, honestly.
Wow. It's crazy. And you were in East Texas?
I was in Austin. I have family in East Texas, but yeah,
Gotcha.
I was in Austin, the heart of Texas. That's where I
Wow.
was born and raised part of the time. I lived all over the place, but then I ended up going back there.
I have never been to Austin, and I don't know anyone who's been there that doesn't love it. Like everyone that goes is like, dude, it's so cool. Of course, I had friends that lived there that are like, get all the tourists and hipsters out of Austin right now. Cause they were just like, and I'm like, dude, it's a cool art city. This is what it is.
It is a cool city. I
Yeah.
still love it. It's definitely a cool place to visit. I will agree. It's living there, it's gotten quite pricey.
Yeah.
So for Texas to have this super expensive city in the middle of it is pretty weird.
Yeah, that is kind of funny because, like, I mean, Houston's on the coastline, but it's like miserably humid and
Oh,
hot.
Houston is the worst.
How is that the third largest city in the country or whatever? Maybe
I
fourth or
don't
whatever it
know.
is.
I don't know why
Um,
so many people live there. I've had friends move there and I'm like, why?
Oil industry. So,
There is a
um,
lot of jobs there because it's so big.
yeah, yeah. So now you're in Connecticut. You're enjoying the Connecticut winter. You've
Yeah.
got this tasty, dark little treat called The Drowning Machine and Other Obsessions. And I always forget the other obsessions part. I'm going to have to ask you before we talk about the content of the collection, where did you get that title?
So one of the stories is the drowning machine. And then so that's like the title story, even though that's one of the stories that had not been published before. And so I was a little bit taking a risk since I knew people wouldn't know it. But the and other obsessions actually comes from the fact that when I was talking with my editor, TJ, about what to call it, I was like, a lot of these stories actually originated from obsessive, like intrusive thoughts I've had because I have OCD. And so then we came up with and other obsessions because a lot of the stories deal with obsession. And then on top of that, they came from intrusive thoughts. So it just felt natural.
Okay, that jives. Because I went into the reading cold. I didn't read, no description, just a cover and a PDF file. It was like, let me just step into this and see what we have. And immediately, because I write a lot of grief horror and I'm, really big on, oh my gosh, the it's like one story after another of
I knew
this.
you loved grief horror, so I knew you would probably dig
Oh,
it.
I'm like, can I just read this forever? And I'm trying to tell my wife what I'm reading, and she's like, dude, what are you doing? And it's not like it's just so beautiful the connections you have between the mothers and the children in these stories. And we'll talk about that theme a little bit. I guess now's probably a good time to ask, but like, did did you intentionally write each of these stories with the mother and child relationship themes in the beginning of the collection? Did that happen naturally, like one story after another, or was this over time? Like, how did this come together?
So these have all been over time, especially those first few. That are the first third of it is very heavy on
Mm,
parenthood,
right.
motherhood horror, and but all of them were written within the last like 4 years because
Wow.
they started when I was pregnant, and so I really was like, I have a 4 year old, and and yeah, they it was so many of my intrusive thoughts had to do with her and like becoming a mother and all the guilt and all the like potential dangers you see all the time and stuff,
Right.
and so it was just inspired by her. That's why it's actually dedicated to her, my daughter Vera.
Yeah.
So for Vera, although I'm sure one day she'll be like, why the hell did you dedicate this to me? And I'm like, it's actually a love letter to you, even though it doesn't seem like it.
You're like, you're the one I was going to open my rib cage up and stick
Right.
inside.
I know, I'm like, I actually love you so much. I wrote so many stories because I'm afraid you're going to die.
Oh, just wonderful. I mean, I was like, this is so good. And I think part of that is like there's a I talked to my daughter about this. She's 13. Um, and we talk a lot about emotions, and we talk a lot about the world, and we talk a lot about, that time of life. She's so young, and she's finding her
Mhm.
stuff that she loves. And a lot of what she's finding is dark. And she's like, I got this from you, dude.
I
And I'm
love
like,
that.
you're welcome. Right.
That's the best.
And so we talk about themes, and we talk about these little layers of story and all the things. She's an avid reader. So I guess the moral of the story here is like when we start unpacking the the relationship between a parent and a child, it's different when you're unpacking the relationship between a mother and a baby and a
Mhm.
mother and a grown child, because there's I mean, it's obviously it's unbreakable connection, but there's a difference in the relationship as that other human matures. And there's such a unique time in the mother's life when the child is an infant, and you just like you know how to pull on like the fears that parents have at that time of their lives, the desperation, the lengths that someone would go to. um I could, the grief that would happen in a parent's life should they experience the loss of a child at that age. I mean, just all of it's there. It's all right there. And I was like just in love with how deep you took it, because back to the point about my daughter, I was telling her, music and words and experiences and relationships that you can feel mean something. It's not just entertainment, it's more than that. And when you can read something and it just takes your heart in both of its hands and goes squeeze and it pulls, like, to me, I'm in. I'm like, we're here. Like, this is great because you made me feel something, and I want to feel something when I read. And so to me,
Same.
it was like winning, like this, like right off the bat, I was like, okay, I'm in. Like, story number one, we're good. Just keep going. And I was worried if you were going to come out the gate like super hard, and then it was going to peter off, and it doesn't.
No, it
No,
doesn't.
it does not.
I definitely carefully selected the stories because I really didn't want there to be like a point where it kind of, yeah, sagged and slowed down. Like, I mean,
Right.
some of the stories are still more like shorter, and so they have a bigger, punch right away. And some of
Right.
them are a little bit softer, but like they all definitely have some intense grief in them. I would say that's one of the biggest
Yeah.
themes throughout the entire collection.
Yeah. Which I just I adore it. And I think you're just so good at touching on these deep emotions and these experiences with such precision and clean prose. And it's like to the point, but it's deep. It's like you didn't have to get flowery or overly dramatic. It just hits like, and to me, that's masterful, right? It's like that's really good writing. So
Oh my God, go on, go on.
go.
I'm joking.
Yeah. So I'm gushing a
No,
little bit, but
I appreciate it. Thank you.
so good. So yeah, you got a big fan of me now. And this was the first thing I'd read of yours. I hadn't actually read an Emma Murray piece until I picked up The Drowning Machine and Other Obsessions. So I was just really impressed with it. Now, there's a lot of continuity in theme amongst that first third of the book.
Mhm.
And so talk to me a little bit about how, like, when you put this collection together, obviously, like you said, you had stories that were developed over several years. Some of these were previously published, some were not. Did you come into this with like a theme? You were like, okay, I want to put this collection together that's kind of leaning into this one kind of focus, and here are all my stories that fit that? Or was it you putting all these things together and going, oh, look, here's this common thread? Like, how did that work for you?
Well, yeah, it was actually funny is that I kind of felt like my story, I knew some of the stories, especially about motherhood, would all fit together, but it wasn't
Mhm.
until I was really going through all my stories and deciding which ones I would want in a collection that I realized how well they did work together, and how often I did write about similar themes and bring them up in different ways.
Mm.
And so it's got a couple different things. It covers like the themes of grief, and it definitely covers like parenthood, even in some of the stories that aren't so much about that. There's only a couple that really don't touch on that a little bit. And it definitely, obsession and feeling hopeless. There's a lot about the loss of innocence. But
Yeah.
there's also a really fun thread that I think is cool, is that it starts with these really young children, like very young, like babies and stuff, and the mothers are usually the character, but still. Then in the middle, there's a lot more like children who are a little bit older,
Mm.
and even kind of bringing in teenagers. And then in the last part, it gets into, there are some still teenagers, but then it gets into like adults and even older people. There's like two stories which have elderly people and
Right.
dealing with the horrors of being older and dealing with like regret. And the last story is actually a love letter to my grandmother who has
Mm.
Alzheimer's, and she unfortunately is at a point that it wouldn't make sense to her now, but like it came from me talking with her when she was still early on, and some of the terrible
Mm.
things that she would experience, because it's very confusing. It's more than just forgetting things,
Right.
it's your brain is really misfiring. And so I wrote that for her. And so it's kind of like the horrors throughout your life, which
Yeah.
sounds really morbid, but it was not supposed to be so morbid. It's kind of in my mind beautiful in a way.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, and so you just saw that kind of progression as you put the stories down and looked at them. You're like, oh, look, boom, 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 like
Yeah,
this is
I was actually kind of surprised at how well they kind of flow this way. And there was a couple stories that I ended up not
gotcha.
including because they didn't fit as well, that I do
Okay.
absolutely love, but I felt like this made it a stronger collection, because I personally don't like collections that are just kind of here's a bunch of stories. And even though there are authors I love that I would still read those collections, the ones that have really like great themes that tie it all together stick with me more, because I'm like, I see why they put this together. It wasn't just another way
Right.
to publish these stories and get them out there. It's on top of that, because I'm sure everybody also, that's why you make collections, that people can access them, especially whenever some of them are like, behind weird paywalls or
Yeah.
magazines that don't exist anymore and stuff. But like to have a theme and have a story to tell throughout the entire thing, it means a lot to me in reading and writing collections.
Well, I loved it. I it gave I like I also love that continuity, being able to kind of stay on a wave. I
Yeah.
don't want to say that like the stories are not the same story um over and over again. So I don't want to give the impression that like if we're on a wave, it's like more of the same. It's just that like you bring someone to a certain emotional state and you keep them right in that pocket, which I thought was very cool because getting there can be hard for some people. For me, it's easy to get there and it's easy to come in and out of it. But I do know that there's readers that aren't like that. Like
Mhm.
they get to a certain point, and coming back out of that can be hard. Like, there's people that read a story, even a short story, and it sticks with them for like a week. You know,
I mean, I've
it's like,
had stories stick with me
yeah,
like that. Those are amazing stories actually. I know some people
yeah,
don't, and there is a list of reading advisories at the end, because I don't want people to be traumatized if this is the kind of thing. It's a very dark and disturbing collection.
yeah,
And so if you do have a hard time pulling out of that, I can see how this would be maybe a collection you wouldn't go into, but I, like you, want to stay in there while I'm
yeah,
reading it. And yeah, I mean, I've actually had several early readers who said it was a super cathartic read, which
yeah,
I really loved hearing.
yeah. Because you don't just this is going to sound a little silly, but it's not grief for grief's sake. It's not like you're
Mhm.
just like, oh, let me just pull everyone's heart apart and stomp it on the floor and, oh, look, didn't that hurt? It's like there's there are like grief is at the center of many of these stories, but so is like how people deal with it, like
Mhm.
certain reactions to it, how certain people are interacting with their own grief or working around the grief in the story, their decisions, their circumstances, all these things kind of surround that emotion, but they're not, there's an interdependence between that emotion and the characters experience in these scenes, because to me short stories are always kind of like a, like give me a scene and
Yeah.
we're out, right? It's like, so we have like these snippets of these people's lives
Mhm.
and they're dealing with this. um some of these people are having a day, let me just tell you, Dana, like,
Yes, they are.
oh my gosh, like, is that a plane crashing behind my house? Like, it's like, oh, look, a deity, like an angel. It's like some really cool stuff. Man, when I read that one and the title slips my mind because I'm terrified. I have
An
like the
angel
worst
of
memory.
God.
Thank you.
Yes, that's
Um,
one of my favorite ones, actually.
oh, I'm like, what is happening? This is so cool. Um, I wanted to like send you an email immediately and be like, talk to me about talk to me about this story. So hopefully the people watching or listening to this will have a similar experience when they read it as well. So okay, so talk to me about the drowning machine, because drowning machines is a real thing, right? Like,
Oh yeah, that's see another reason, another factor of it being in other obsessions is I actually have kind of a weird obsession with some very strange specific things, which include drowning machines, which are low head dams, which are really lame if you don't know why they have this scary sign because they really just look like the tiniest little dam thing, but they create this current that you can't break out of, and that's kind of also one of the themes of this is that people are trapped in these situations and in their grief. And so I actually was super obsessed with drowning machines, and also there's also a story about an industrial lathe that is funny enough also something that rotates that I have a weird obsession with.
well, lathes are terrifying.
Yes, they are.
When I was a machinist, I used to tell people like, do not let that thing get a hold of you.
Oh,
Like,
I would never even approach one.
it's one of the only times I got yelled at in this service was like me and another guy were trying to fit a piece of metal in a lathe that we were going to try and spin out. And this one of the smarter people walked in and goes, just shuts the door and goes, the hell do you think you two are doing? And we're
Oh
like,
my god.
we're going to fix this part. He's like, step away from the lathe.
I'm glad
Like,
that he stopped you.
you're,
Like,
you're,
geez, this is
you're
why
getting,
people die in life.
yeah, you're getting ready to lose your hand, dude. It's like, we punched a bunch of dumb mechanics. Like, we can figure it out. Like, how hard can
Yeah,
it
don't
be?
get
We know.
cocky. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, around scary things like that. It's the same
yeah,
reason why people get stuck in drowning machines because they think it's just this little thing. A lot of times people are, like kayaking or something, and
yeah.
they're like, I can go over. It's not a big deal. It's just a little bump. And then you get stuck. And it's the current, the way that it spins is so intense that you first of all, lose any sense of direction, and then you also have a hard time actually getting out of it. Like it's actually really hard for rescuers to even pull people out of those, like.
So there's a little bit of a metaphor there with the
Maybe,
collection,
yeah.
right? I mean, I felt that way, being in there and reading it. I didn't want to put it down. And I will tell you this, I went to bed every night reading it and woke up every morning just a little weirder than I went to bed. So,
Yeah, I
so
don't know if it's great bedtime reading material.
I'm blessed with the ability to black out when I go to sleep. Like I just wake up whenever, it's like always way earlier than it should be, but I don't recall my dreams. So you're probably impacting me in ways I'm yet to realize. I'll just figure it out by the time we see each other at StokerCon.
See, that's so crazy. I'm the opposite. In fact, a lot of
Yeah.
stories and even some of my novels have been inspired by a dream that I had where like a scene came to me and usually it's like the climax of whatever the
Mm.
story or the novel and I'm like, oh, I have to write this down. Because I have super vivid crazy dreams almost every night.
So yeah, I mean, my wife is the same way. She's just like grits on me half the time because of things that I've said or whatever that in her dream, and I'm like, I
Oh,
can't.
that's always the worst. Yeah, when you wake up and you're like mad at your partner because you're like,
It
why'd you
wasn't
say that
me,
in my
man.
dream? But it feels so real.
She's like, you. So with this I mean, can you recall, like, are there specific, this might be an unfair question. Are there specific stories in this collection that you know for sure were like dream inspired?
I let me think. Actually, yeah, lavender and dandelions. That
Oh,
one was inspired by kind of this. I mean, it starts with an apocalyptic event happening, like a nuclear war has gone
yeah.
hot. And it was a really horrible dream that was about me and my daughter. And I woke up and was like, oh, I can change this a little bit and make this a pretty good story. So, I mean, I appreciate the traumatic dreams that my brain gives me, apparently.
Well, that one did get me. Because basically in that story, for people that haven't read it without giving any spoilers, there's this uh there's like a military attack.
Mhm.
And this mother is basically in a position to shield her daughter from the realities of what's happening around them, but also there's this inevitable ending, and the mother's kind of has this responsibility to care for her daughter in the worst of ways, through the ending there. And I was just like, oh, so good, Emma.
See, that's another one of the themes that sounds kind of lame when I talk about it, but it's true is that love is actually a really important part of these stories. Like there is usually some kind of a love that goes along with the grief,
Yeah.
and that's what pulls this character through. And that's why grief can be so intense because there wouldn't be grief that intense if you didn't love.
There's a quote out there, and I'm going to butcher this, but essentially it touches on that point, and it goes something like, um, grief, like, is the reward of love, or something like that. It's like you can't have grief without loving.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that
I
quote?
feel like I've heard something like
Yeah, something really witty that I
that.
can't remember.
It's a little different, but
Yeah, it's probably like way better than what I just would just whipped up. But essentially, there's this like that grief does not exist without a certain level of love. Like you have to love first. It's like it's almost like this. It's the price we pay for love, I think, is how the quote
oh,
goes. It's
yes,
like
that sounds
grief is
right.
the price
Yeah.
we pay for love, or something like that. Um, and I think, I mean, I was going to initially ask you if you were a parent, when
I think it's
we,
pretty obvious in my stories I'm a
yeah,
parent.
I was like, if she's not a parent and she pulled this off, she's got fantastic
I'm not
connection.
that
Yeah,
good.
that's phenomenal. I don't know if you've experienced this with, I mean, because obviously you've been writing grief horror and other really heavy topics for so long, but when I put out Bury the Child, which is, pretty much a grief horror novella, I mean, the response from some people uh, was I had a responsibility when I wrote that I didn't realize I had until it was published, and people started talking to me about it in public. People I didn't know, like on a plane, they'd be like, "Oh, you're an
Whoa,
author."
on a plane, you're, like, trapped.
Yeah, I'm like sitting next to someone on a plane, and they're like, "Oh, you write?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "What do you write?" And I'm like, "Oh,
Oh my
spooky
gosh.
stuff, horror stuff." And they're like, "What's the name of one of your books?" And you're like, "Bury the Child." And they're like, "Oh God." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's grief horror." And they're like, "I lost a child." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh." Like there's this level of responsibility when we write about these types of circumstances, even if the story itself is, you know,
Yeah, one of the
most
stories
definitely fiction,
yes.
you know?
One of the stories that actually I worry still because it hasn't come my collection hasn't come out yet, that will be hard for people is, one that has to do so it's called The Profound Pain of Letting Go, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, so if people don't wanna know, I guess, like, fast forward, like, a little tiny bit, but, like, it has to do with a child, a kindergartner who experiences a school shooting, but it's very off page what happens, it's more about him in this weird liminal space that kind of is, like, where he goes after, and I mean, unfortunately, so many people have had children that have been in school shootings, but it is inspired. I was a teacher. I was a first grade teacher for many years. And it was definitely like, it comes from a place of love. It's not supposed to be, a way to like, he's not playing off of that trauma and being like, let me shock you and stuff. That one I
Right.
spent extra care on because I didn't want it to feel like that. I wanted it to be about the terrible fears that come with that for children, for teachers, for parents, and just how, the emotions that come with it. It's honestly, that one is so grief horror that it's almost not horror. It's almost just the grief.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's beautiful. And I say that with respect to the fact that grief is terrible, right? But at the same time, like being able to write a story that accurately portrays that and does it in a classy way, like, without, like you said, without exploiting um, a character or a person's circumstances. This is really a beautiful thing to be able to do because, as you had mentioned before, for some people, that's very cathartic.
Mhm.
That's kind of the thing that surprised me a little bit about writing grief horror and the response that a lot of readers have to grief horror is that some people really view it as like a kind of a therapeutic experience. Um, with Bury the Child, for example, I was made sure that it was very atmospheric and beautiful. In fact, it
Mhm.
wasn't scary. It was kind of alluring and addictive. I wanted the mother to feel drawn to it, not repulsed by it. I wanted her to
Mhm.
fall in love with, oh, this feels so much better despite the pain. And like there's a different treatment there, but people have a hard time understanding that on the surface when they haven't really explored the work and read your
Yeah.
words and understand that you could write a school shooting story that's not a school shooting story,
Yeah, that's not
right?
like, yeah, because I know some authors that, and honestly, I don't judge because some people are really into like that intense splatterpunk type extreme horror
Right.
where it's just a shock.
Right.
And that I do write things that are more extreme, but I don't like being lumped in with that just because, not because I don't respect them as writers, but it's really not going to give what those readers are looking for. Like,
Right.
and yeah, I agree. Actually, my writing is super cathartic for me. So it's always nice to hear that it's cathartic for people who read it
Right.
because I have gone through lots of losses in my life. And so even whenever I'm writing about a grief that I haven't personally experienced, it definitely is still pulls from my own experiences and in that way does feel therapeutic.
Yeah, so when we come to like the point of like theming the the book, I mean, obviously it's about so much more than grief,
Mhm.
and it's about so much more than just like, let me just pull you under and hold you in this dark little place and punch your little heart until it, is bruised and hurting. Like there's more to it than just the experience of feeling that grief and pain and a little bit of shock. This
Definitely some shock. Yeah.
Yeah, there's shock. These stories get a little weird, and I'm not I'm not repulsed by weird horror. I find it when it's done very tastefully. I'm like, ooh, I like that. You do a very good job, in my personal opinion, as a reader, um, of making this story. It's not extreme, but it is.
Yeah.
It's
That's
emotional.
exactly what I'm going for. Yeah. Not extreme,
Yes.
but it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's and because it's extreme, not in a way that's like I'm just doing, like you said, I'm not doing something to just be shocking or controversial.
Mhm.
It's just a little out, like, man, we're going to color outside the lines and everybody's going to be on board with it. And here we go. And you start going, and I'm like, oh, that's yes. Like, just twists reality in a way that you're like, able to see. It makes me wonder if it's more of a psychological horror bend at that point. When things get weird and it's based on character experience, to me, it feels like it's borderline psychological horror because in many ways I leave those stories wondering if that's really what the person sees or is it
Mhm.
just a weird story, right? It's like, for example, we talked about the one with the angel,
Mhm.
and
Yes.
not, I'm trying not to give spoilers by saying what the angel was or what's going on there, but um the character of the angel is obviously a bend on reality. I was
Mhm.
left wondering, is this mother really experiencing this? Kind of like
Yeah. And
one
she's
of
in her own grief already. So you have to think about where is her mind at?
yeah.
Yeah, like
So
it,
how
it's such a
yeah,
sad story. Even that's the thing is that I don't ever know exactly how to classify a lot of my stuff because I'm like sometimes I say psychological horror, but then it's too gory for people that are
mm,
like went into it hearing that. But then if I say body horror or extreme horror, then a lot of times it's not extreme enough for a lot of people who are looking for, some of that fun, like squishing eyeballs and stuff. And not that that stuff doesn't sometimes happen in my stories, but not often enough, I think.
well, and I'm gonna just gonna pick one story out of the pile here to just kind of dive into a little bit more to kind of show why this is the point I make
Uh-huh.
regarding this. Whole Again
I love
was
it. Yeah.
so good. I was like, okay. I'm not sure if this is just going to be like, because there's a point where it starts to progress to the point where you're like, okay, if what's happening is real, then this is weird horror,
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah,
But if it's not what's really happening, it's just the deepest level of trauma.
yeah. That's true for a lot of my stories.
And I'm not
They're
going to
like,
tell
either
people.
it's real and it's okay, or it's, like, not real and it's terrible.
So I'm not going to tell people what the result is at the end of that story, but because it becomes very apparent. But as I was reading that, I was like, "Oh wow, here we go!" Like it's a good example of to me, like kind of like the a little bit of like the twisted, like extreme but not extreme, but definitely weird horror kind of bend to it, and it was so good to read that done that way because I it almost leaves me wondering like will I actually be shocked? Like, can I be shocked if I read this? Is this going to get worse? Like, is this going to progress? Because the gloves kind of come off.
I mean, I guess it depends what gets to you too, is the
Yeah.
thing, because I feel like the very first third of it for me, I think is probably some of the most traumatic stuff, but I could
Right.
see different people having
Mm,
different stories be much more intense and sad for them.
yeah. Um. Okay. And then there was one title I thought was just so much fun. Um. Well, one, the profound pain of letting go is just a brilliant title.
Thank you. I was I love that title, and I've had some people say it's too long.
I don't care. I thought that was when I saw that title on that short story. I was like, oh, I love that.
I love a long title. Like,
It was like such a metal title.
thank
I'm
you.
like, this is like a prog metal title. Like this should be like on a Tesseract album. But Dying Ain't Nothing But Falling Asleep. Love that one too. So
Thank you.
where did you like what inspired Dying Ain't Nothing But Falling Asleep? I mean, it's like, yeah, but then I'm like, you even like go with the abbreviated spelling. Like this is like a
Yeah,
really fun little title.
that one, it's like that one actually, it definitely, I had it try and get it places, and it was hard because it is written in a very like vernacular slang. And I mean, I love strong voice, and that's probably one of the strongest voices because it's from this like young teenage preteen person who is in this dystopian world. And I love dystopian worlds, and I actually don't write them that much. And so that one is one of the more, yeah, kind of actually speculative stories in here. And I am glad that actually I've had multiple people say they like that one a lot and that it was one of their favorites, which I was worried that it would be more difficult to read because it is written in a way that you sometimes have to work at. But as someone who loves things like Faulkner, I don't mind whenever things are written like that. So I don't always think about how other people might not like that.
It's it, I think that's such a hard thing to put your finger on, anyways, unless you're writing like contemporary market fiction. It's like no matter what the genre is, when you're writing genre fiction, I think it's you can kind of release that a little bit and be like, I'm gonna get a little sideways here and see what happens.
Oh, yeah, I love trying weird experimental stuff with my writing, and it doesn't always make it out there into like the big magazines and stuff, but it's fun to do. Yeah.
So this brings up a good point. Collections.
Mhm.
Getting collections out there, as we spoke about before. One of my favorite success stories to bring up about collections is No Gods Only Chaos from LP Hernandez, my
Mhm.
my partner in crime over at Sobolo Books. He had assembled this collection before we even put Sobolo together, and when we released it, it had such a strong response from the horror community that it kind of set me back on my heels a little bit because I've never written a collection. I'm a long fiction writer. I
Mhm.
hadn't written short fiction since I was a teenager.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
which
long
is a
time.
long time ago, right? So like not to, beat myself up too much, but I'm 46 years old and I haven't written a short story since I was 16. So it's been like 30 years since I've written short stories. And I was a little not I guess I was a little surprised to see how well uh people like just jumped into that. Like there are some people that just absolutely love short story collections, and I thought I was a little bit of a minority in that. I love reading them. I'm just not great at writing them.
I love reading them too, but it's just
Oh,
authors pretty much, I feel.
it's
There are some people love it, but it feels like if you didn't go to school for literature or
mm,
like creative writing, or you're some kind of writer, people tend to not want to delve into that. They're like, well, I want to have a lot of people love series and stuff. They're like, I want to be with a character for a long time. And a lot of people haven't even read short stories that resonated with them because they haven't
mm,
read anything since like high school or something.
right,
That yeah. And like especially back then, I mean, you could easily read a story that could affect you later
mm,
that at the time you're like, who cares, you know?
right,
And so I think it's harder to get collections and anthologies out to people outside of writers and like people who are yeah deep in the horror community. I think that those are my favorite people because they're always reading that cool stuff that I can talk to them about. But like sometimes you're like, how do I get people outside of this to read it because they only want to read long form?
yeah. And I think one of the cool things about a collection, if I could just put a like a stamp of like here's a benefit to people, is if you adore an author, you've got to read their short fiction.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
you know,
100% yes.
yeah, because it's not just a matter of like being able to exist in it's a different type of writing. It's a different type of story. So if you really like love a writer and they write long form and you want to really like Stephen King kind of, is probably the
Mhm,
easiest example to use that people would be able to relate to. Just like every other kid growing up in the 80s that was in love with horror stuff, I was obsessed with Stephen King. And so,
mhm.
I'm reading Four Past Midnight. It's like these four books in one. I'm like, this is so cool. I get four, not one. I get all four of these. And they're, basically like full on books, but it was a lot. I mean, but then you're reading all these different collections he put together. And to me, it was nice for like a palate cleanser. If I
Mhm.
just left a really big Stephen King book, I could come into a collection and just knock out a story in an afternoon or even in an hour
Yeah.
and feel like I accomplished something.
That's true too. It's kind of easier sometimes to work through collections and
Yeah.
anthologies if you don't have a lot of time to read because I
Yes.
mean, the first time I tried to read The Stand, I had to put it down for like a week and then I picked it up and didn't remember who the hell anybody was and had to
Yep.
start over again. And I was like halfway through. There's like 100 characters in that book
Yeah.
that you need to know. There's probably like 1,000 characters,
Yeah.
and like a lot of them are like one page, like this guy walked in and stuff. But actually, I love that about Stephen King. I actually like a lot of his shorter stories because I think Stephen King is very hit or miss for me. I love, love, love some of the pieces, and then some of the other novels, I'm like, mm. But with the short stories, I think he kind of cuts out some of the stuff that I think is too much. He gives a little bit too much sometimes, like backstory and stuff. And not that you don't want that, but sometimes I'm like, really, wow, like nothing has really happened to this person. It's been like 200 pages, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and the short story, he knows he can't do that. And so I think he really shines sometimes with his horror in those shorter stories because he knows he has to get to that
Yes.
punch.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why, if you find a really good author, go read their short fiction and really see what they can deliver in that. I
Yeah.
mean, because that to me is a sign of a really strong storyteller when they can achieve that in a shorter amount of words in a succinct delivery. Um, my shortest work I've published is 20,000 ish words. So I'm I know I'm at a disadvantage when it comes to writing shorter fiction like that. It's harder for me as
It's
a
different. It's really different process
yeah,
completely. I feel like it's nothing like writing a novel.
right. So not to nerd out too much on the writer's side of things, but just as a reader, I think if you find a collection of someone you haven't read before, it's a really good way to see what kind of chops they've got, and it's a great way to kind of get in their mind really fast and get around in there and kind of run amok and see where like they'll take you. and it gives you a good idea of whether you should invest in their long form work. And then if you're used to reading someone that does novels and novellas pretty much for a living, and they drop a short story collection, man, go grab that thing because it's going to be full of all kinds of crazy stuff that just didn't get in those bigger books, and it's going to be a wild ride. So I'm, like I said before, this was the first thing I've read of yours, and now I'm just like ready to vacuum up all the Emma Murray stuff. So
Thank you.
super cool. Okay, so before we burn this last 10 minutes to the ground, with the typical closing stuff like book recs and what comes next and all the cool things that people usually hear at the end, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you a few questions that I normally ask during interviews. And it has almost always something to do with what the heck got you into writing this kind of stuff? How long have you been doing it? And is there any musical influence in your writing?
So I have been writing since I was a little kid, as most writers always have that story, and it is true. Like, I mean, I have a lot of little staple books out of like copy paper that like my dad kept for me and stuff. And I've been loving telling stories since I was little. And what's really funny is I've actually found some pretty creepy for a little kid like stories from back then. I found one about this creature called the leaf faller who like makes this leaf fall to distract you so that it can jump on you and get you. And it never like got into like what does it do, but I was like, that's a horror story. And I wrote that when I was like 6, and I'm kind of like, all right, go Emma, I like that.
Yeah.
So I've been doing it for a long time, but I really got serious about writing. Right about when I turned 30, and I was like, I've always wanted to be a writer. It was always, and everyone will tell you that I've talked about that my whole life. And I had been a teacher, and I went to grad school even for literature before I went for elementary education. And I was
Okay.
just kind of like, because I love to read too so much. And I was just like, I don't know if I can be a writer. I had some like I won some awards and stuff in high school, and I had been writing secretly, like not without submitting it anywhere for like
Mm.
years, but I always felt like I wasn't good enough. And then whenever I was about to turn 30, I was like when I was like 29-ish, like a little after that I was like, I'm gonna fucking write a novel. And so I did. And that was when I really just got back into it and was like, wow, I can put myself out there. I don't have to hide all my stories, although there's definitely a lot of bad ones. Looking back, like now that I've grown so much as a writer, I look back and I'm like, yeah, a lot of these weren't up to par, but I really just was like, that's what I'm going to do. And then ever since I had my daughter, I've been a stay-at-home mom, and I've been able to be a writer full time because of that. Although I'll say full time in quotes, because if you are a mom listening, especially stay-at-home mom, you understand that I actually am mostly pretty busy. Like people think like, oh, you just get to write all day, and I'm like,
No.
no, I really wish it was like that.
Mm-mm. Yeah. No.
With music, I definitely get inspired by music. One of my favorite ways to come up with ideas, if it's not from a crazy dream, is to just drive around, like whenever, especially when you're doing a long drive, like if it's at least half an hour, and just kind of listen to just random shuffle music that I have, because I actually have very diverse music taste. And sometimes like a song or just an like one lyric out of a song sticks in my head, and I'm like, oh, yes, that's a great idea. But they're usually not like a one to one. It's like when I try to explain it to people, they usually don't understand how that inspired that. They're like, but why? That has nothing to do with this. And I'm like, I can't explain my brain. Okay. Like, I heard this thing and it gave me this idea, even though that seems unrelated. But I love music. It definitely helps me. Although whenever I'm writing, I actually need it to be very quiet. Like I can have like white noise or, like background noise. My daughter can be running around, if she's actually letting me be alone for a minute. Like, that doesn't bother me, but I can't listen to music. It actually just gets to me too much. I think about the music and then I kind of feel blocked actually. But I
Mm.
but I use it outside of the actual draft.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So good inspiration, but not a good soundtrack.
Yeah, I actually really envy people that listen to music, and I know people that listen to the same song because they're like, this is the song, like the theme song of this scene or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that must be really cool because I do get so much inspiration from music, but it just doesn't work for my brain. I really need it to be quiet so I can
Mhm.
like see it, because I'm very visual imagery in my mind whenever I'm writing. And I feel like the music, it just like interferes with that somehow. I don't know if
Gotcha.
that makes sense, but
No, it makes sense.
okay.
Yeah, I'm the person you were just talking about where like I can listen to the same song when I write a chapter every day or the same string of songs.
See, that's so
Um,
cool. And then you can give them like a playlist because so many authors have playlists. And I think that's really
yeah,
fun as a reader. Whenever I see their playlist and I'm like, oh, usually I'll be like, not listen unless they have it like this chapter is this song. I'll just
yeah,
listen to it at the same time that I'm reading it, like ish.
yeah,
And I'm like, oh, I can totally see the connections. But if I give you a playlist for novels, sometimes it would be like this one lyric and this one song, but I didn't listen to it at all when I was writing it.
yeah. Well, I use it as a tool to bring me somewhere else, right? It
Mhm.
like inspires my emotional state
Yeah.
that I want to achieve with either the character or like the tone I want to set. So, like I was reading your collection the same week I'm writing, a novel. So I said week like I'm writing a novel in a week. At the same time I'm writing
That would
this
be
novel, it's
pretty
gonna
impressive.
it's gonna take me forever. But during this week, as I'm reading your story, it's inspiring me. And then I'll listen to certain music and that inspires me. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm being filled with these emotions and I'm being filled with these characters, depths, and experiences. And I find the same thing with the reading that I find in the music. And then I can go listen to that. It's almost like this is going to be over way dramatic, but I'll put on a song that I know takes me somewhere and I'll just let it like pull, like just grab me and just sink. Like, let's go all the way down there. Like,
I love that for you, though.
and
That sounds
just sit on the
awesome.
bottom.
Yeah.
And I don't care how hard you try to get out of there. Like, it will not let go of you. And it's like, now I can talk. Now I can write. Now because I've got to be at like 20 feet down to get that right. Or it's not going to come out. It won't be as expressed as well. So I actually admire someone who is the inverse of that, that doesn't need that to get to that point because I can write this stuff when I'm not listening to that kind of music or having that kind of influence, but it's less effective for me.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know if that's, it's kind of funny because we have the same experience with the opposite
Yeah,
influence.
that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking because 'cause I'm really like, yeah, when it's quiet, I'm like, "Okay, I can finally really think about this. Because I tend to write a lot at night or my daughter goes a couple days a week to, like, preschool in the morning only. So it's
Right.
only a couple hours off, and, like, during those hours, it's quiet, and I'm like, "Oh, I can finally write about it because
Yeah.
there isn't, Coco Melon or something in the background,
Which you could probably write some really good short
Oh my
stories.
god, I don't oh, I think that's a horror on its own.
Yes, that's like
It doesn't
so
need me to contribute anything.
no. No, you could just just jot down your observations. So what's the release date for the collection?
February 21st.
February 21st. All right. And you and I were speaking beforehand that you're going to be at StokerCon this year
I
in
am, my first time. I'm so excited. I've wanted to go for years. Ever since I got into horror, I was like, "Oh my god, I really wanna go," but it's expensive and I want to
yeah,
justify, but now I'm in Connecticut and it's in Connecticut, so it's less expensive for me 'cause I don't have to fly somewhere crazy.
so there you
And
go.
I have some things out now finally because I always felt like I actually know a lot of people who go without anything and they got a lot out of it. So I feel like that was probably just me being afraid that people were going to judge me or something. But now that I have some stuff out, I feel like, okay, I'd be able to be like, I have this book, I'm not just nobody,
Well,
a
and
little bit nobody, but
you're not a nobody. And if anyone if you or anyone thinks that, they're A, wrong, and B, they're underestimating what's getting ready to happen to them when they discover your stuff because it's definitely not the writing of a nobody. You also have a book coming out this summer,
yes, in August.
right?
Yes.
So, and are
And
you
it
allowed
is
to talk
called
about that yet?
yeah, I can talk about it. So it's coming out from Apocalypse Party, who I love. They put out my first novel, Crushing Snails, and so this is another novel that's got a serial killer in it, which is also Crushing Snails, is a serial killer. I love serial killers. There's also some of that in my collection, even not that much, but a little bit.
You love serial
um,
killers or you love writing about serial killers?
I mean, am I a little bit obsessed with true crime like most moms? Yes, like, but I don't want to know them personally.
Maybe from the safety of a prison. Yeah.
Yeah, I would never be like one of those people that writes to them or something. I'm not that crazy, okay?
I was just getting ready to recommend that actually.
Oh my no, I wouldn't I don't need to know it. Like, I already I know enough. I have a degree in psychology. I actually am good. Like,
Yeah.
but, so it's called Shoot Me in the Face on a Beautiful Day.
Ugh.
And I really that was actually a title that my agent wanted me to shorten. And she actually told me now, like on a recent call, she was like, "I'm so glad we didn't." And I'm like, "Right," because people really like it, and I really fought for it because I was like, "I really feel like it hits you, you
Say
know."
that say that title slowly though.
Shoot me in the face on a beautiful day.
Oh, it's so good. I was so you sent me the files and I'm
Mhm.
like, I automatically went to that one. And I was like, this is the one I'm reading right now. And then I was like, wait a second. I go back to the email and I'm like,
I
'cause,
mean, but you got it early, so you do get to
yeah, but
take a peek.
the title's brilliant.
Thank you. It's I really love it. It has a lot to do with well, one of my biggest fears, which is home invasion. So
Mm.
there's like a home invading serial killer, and please, if you're listening, don't invade my home. You know? But I really got to play with that, which is something I've always wanted to write about because it does scare me so bad. So I really it came to me in this idea as this novel was developing, and I was like, oh, I actually finally get to really dig into that, but it also has a lot to do with domestic violence, and I actually am a survivor of domestic violence, and
Oh,
so but I feel really empowered by this book because it's not it goes a lot into the complicated emotions about like why do especially women, I know there's also men who are in these situations of course, but like it's mostly women that
yeah.
are in these situations, and why do they stay, and that they're not always perfect victims, and that there's complicated feelings, and like also the other kinds of abuse, like emotional and psychological abuse. There's definitely a lot of that in there. And I'm actually going to be donating part of the proceeds to the domestic violence hotline because I definitely want people to be able to call and get help because it was really hard to leave. But it was super cathartic, like we were talking about, writing about it. And I really hope that it will be cathartic to people who read it, although definitely heavy trigger warnings. Like both of my novels, very, very intense. Like if you know Apocalypse Party, then you know how intense they are. So it's very much in that vein.
Well, I'm going to beg you to come back to talk about that book closer to the release date because,
Oh, I definitely will. That'll be
yeah,
fun.
I think now that we've talked about it a little bit, people are going to be itching to hear all about that story, and um, I can't wait to dive into that when I finish the collection. And I just encourage everybody to support Emma and go out and get the freaking Drowning Machine and other obsessions. I was telling her beforehand, my brain just does not remember the last word. And that's just me. I'm just weird. And pick it up, enjoy it. It's a brutal little nugget of short stories. Gosh, I love it. And I'm just so grateful that you were able to take the time out of your busy life and come on and share your experiences with the collection and your insights and your work with everybody that's watching or listening to the show. And I can't wait to see it at StokerCon so I can give you a big high five in person for all the crazy feels I got reading this collection. So
Well, thank you so much for having me. I
yeah,
appreciate talking about I can talk about these short stories forever and grief horror, which you love too. So
yeah,
it's easy to get into a good rhythm.
awesome. All right, well, we're gonna do a quick bullet wreck. Um, what have you read lately that you absolutely loved?
So I got to read an early version, an arc, to get to write a blurb for The Divine Flesh by Drew Huff, and it's coming out really soon.
It
I can't
is.
remember exactly the date, but yeah. Oh my god, it was crazy. It was really good, but man, it felt like I was tripping, like for real, like an acid trip. Some of the craziest body horror I've ever read. And I mean body horror in the like transforming your body way, not whenever people misuse it to meaning just gore.
Mm.
Although there's also a lot of really crazy gore. And that book is amazing because it not only does it hit some really sad things, which I was surprised because it's actually really funny a lot of the time too, which is hard to do. I think that getting that right balance is really difficult. And this Drew did an amazing job. Like I was blown away by this. And I think people are gonna really love this one. Actually, I think it's gonna become kind of like a cult classic type
I love
book.
how excited you are.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. It's so unique. It felt like
Uh,
something I'd never read before, and that's it, which is
yeah,
hard because I read a lot. So
that's cool. That's cool.
definitely recommend that one.
Awesome.
I also really recommend the anthology coming out. I think like in just a couple of days, called Between Doorways,
Mm,
and it's edited by T.J. Price, who also helped edit The Drowning Machine. But this is an anthology of liminal horror, and I love liminal stuff. Okay, like oh my god, that weird nostalgia feeling, and that just in between, and that's what it's all about. Is and it really hits on every story hits on a different kind of liminality, which I really enjoyed because some of them I hadn't really thought about how some of these scenarios could be kind of liminal. And then of course it also will definitely hit a favorite for you. Like if you love like weird, creepy children's like ball pit places and stuff, there's a story like that. You know, if you like a weird abandoned like factory, there's a story like that. Like if you can think of a weird liminal space, there's a story about it. And they were almost all hits for me, which is hard with anthologies. I usually
wow.
feel like I like usually at least a third. But this
Mm,
one, I would say I think there was only like maybe one or two stories that didn't hit me like as like this is amazing. I need to
wow.
recommend this.
Well,
So definitely recommend that one as well.
you've got me convinced. I'm going to pick up both of them, and I'm going to be meeting Drew at Horror Reader Weekend in Fredericksburg, Virginia, in May. So I think it's May 2nd through 4th.
Well, you definitely have to read The Divine Flesh before then, so you can gush about it because you're gonna love it. Like just
Yeah,
based on what I know about you, you will love it.
I can't wait to see that book. And again, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to talk to you again. Uh, freaking love the title of that book, and I can't wait to read it. So I'm excited to be able to nerd out with you a little bit about that one closer to the release. Everybody, go out and get your freaking copy of the collection. Get that in your brain. Get ready for the summer because it's going to get weird again at the end of the summer. And Emma, it's just been an absolute blast. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.